Here to discuss further is Steve Bannon, former White House chief strategist and host of War Room. Steve, welcome so much and thank you for being here.
Batya, I think that is the single best analysis and assessment I have heard in all the words that are out there, all the different channels. Quite brilliant, really brilliant. One thing I just want to add to that, I want to make sure that Jared Kushner and Witkoff get also the due credit they are, and I want to go back in time. If you look at this as a continuum of President Trump and how he thinks, I think this starts to make more sense. The underpinnings of this are commercial relationships and actually building middle class and working class throughout the world, in this case, in the Middle East. If you go back to our very first trip in May of 2017, of which, by the way, you remember Qatar was kind of odd man out because they wouldn't step forward and really do what UAE, Saudis working with us about terror financing. But the whole underpinning of that was a new dawn to kind of put the politics aside for a second, and let's look at the economic vitality of the region, particularly post-oil. You know, what's the region going to do? How's it going to expand? And Israel as a potential technology partner. Then you have the Abraham Accords. Jared's kind of the architect of that for President Trump. The Abraham Accords is essentially not a political deal. It's an economic deal. It tries to integrate the commercial relationships, the jet flights, the capital markets, trade in the region. And I think this is one of the reasons that it never really got, first it was President Trump, obviously, but the diplomatic and kind of political people that write about this don't really understand it. It's more of a business deal, the way Jared had always thought of it. Then you cut to the first trip in the spring to the Gulf Emirates, to Saudi Arabia and to Qatar, and also the UAE. All of that was about building commercial relationships between the United States and the Gulf Emirates, but also the potential that we could have peace. And if we had peace, we have broader commercial relations. That is what's underpinning this deal today. It's really that, you know, the Palestinians are not going to leave. There's going to be a massive redevelopment. The Arab nations, the Gulf Emirates, essentially putting up the money. The Turkey and others are going to provide the security. So I think if you look at his commercial relationships, this has a beginning with President Trump and how he thinks, and Jared Kushner, who I think Jared is really the unspoken hero and back President Trump and really working on this. It's quite brilliant. Now, that being said, particularly those of us that have been friends of Israel for many, many decades and have really fought a two-state solution, I think we have to face reality. What's happening in Gaza, I think, is the beginning of the proto-Palestinian or proto, Arab state. The Gulf Emirates are essentially going to finance it. There may be some interim, 200 American troops to do some sort of coordination from CENTCOM, but eventually Turkey and others are going to be there. There's also blocked any more expansion or really the historic claim of Israel on Judea Samaria. That looks like it's going to be blocked. So I think it was a overplay by Netanyahu, and we are where we are, but obviously historic. And I think if you take it from the business perspective, the commercial perspective, he essentially took the power of the hands of the politicians, put it in the hands of the business people, and I think you're going to get peace. What I found most striking today of everything, you had people in the streets dancing, a very moving press conference or press briefing by the IDF, who I think are also been the unspoken heroes here. What they had to go through in this war against the Hamas, or what I call the Muslim Brotherhood fighting brigades. The actual spokesman, I think today, actually broke down in tears, talking about, and this shows you how tough they've had this fight and how they were not looking forward to going back in there and doing what they're requested to do. And this is why I think the head of the IDF and Netanyahu came to loggerheads over the last 3 or 4 months. But when the soldiers of the IDF are in back of a deal and they have a spokesman that's in tears, I think that shows you how deep an issue this was, and why both Israeli citizens and the Palestinians and the whole region and the world are celebrating Donald J. Trump. He's the only person that can pull this off.
One of the things that I mentioned in the editorial was how important this was for Trump in terms of restoring Israel to having support, both worldwide and in America. Among young people, support for Israel has really been cratering. I want to play you something the president said about Israel. Let's have SOT 1.
No president in history has been a greater friend of the state of Israel than I have. History has shown us that those who have relations with Israel have thrived, while those who have devoted resources and attention toward the destruction and even annihilation of Israel have languished. They haven't done well. Israel is not going anywhere.
So President Trump has really been at the forefront of making the argument that there's no conflict between being America first and being pro-Israel. He's very proud of his sort of pro-Israel bona fides. There is an emerging split among right-wing influencers on this question. Where do you fall on this? Do you feel that there's a conflict between being America first and being pro-Israel? And is the future GOP a pro-Israel party?
Let me give you a definition. By the way, I think the most important thing that he said to Netanyahu, because let's be blunt, Ron Dermer, Ambassador Dermer, who is a great guy and I know quite well, think very highly of him, and Bibi at the end were not in the room, not in the deal. They really weren't looking for input from it, and that should be the Israeli people and the Jewish people in the United States to really embrace that. What happened at the end of this deal to make it happen? You know, Dermer went to the resort, the Red Sea resort, but really wasn't a big part of the final negotiations. Bibi was not part of the final negotiations. The president told Bibi he can't take on the world. And what he meant by that is that we're not going to be dragged into this as you take on the world. There's a huge difference between being America first and pro-Israel and being Israel first. And I have been I have a long history of being very pro-Israel, and particularly being a non-two-state solution, Israel's historic claim to Judea, Samaria, and other aspects of it. But what happened here is you had the commentators and the folks who I call Israel first, that put Israel, and particularly Netanyahu, not really Israel, put Netanyahu's political situation at the forefront. And I think this came to a head over the Persian, or I say the Iranian situation, which we now know from the Times of Israel and detailed analysis of the war cabinet meetings. It was 2 years before they got a bomb. This is coming from the war cabinet as they made a decision on that night. And we kept saying that this was all a sense of urgency that didn't need to be there. I think you started to see a split right there between the America first and what I call the Israel first. And I would tell my Jewish friends, and I would tell people in Israel, I said, under 35 years old, you almost have no support right now, zero support. And a big, huge part of that is, as you know, Batya, you and I have talked about it, this progressive takeover of the universities, which is not anti-Semitic, it is Jew hatred, right? And make it very difficult for Jewish people here in the United States. So we have a massive problem. I gave a speech at NatCon. And in that speech at NatCon, I said, look, if you love Israel, if you support Israel and you support the Jewish people, the problem that we have right now is not in Tehran. The problem you have right now is in the streets of New York, where you have Zohran, who is a neo-Marxist jihadist with all types of money through his parents. We have no idea where this money is coming from. It's going to be, he's Sadiq Khan on testosterone. And to prove that, happened on October 7th in the streets of New York, which the mainstream media has not reported, but War Room did. There was a orgy of hatred against Israel and the Jewish people that took place all the evening of October 7th on the second anniversary of the horrific attack. And you saw, I tell you, you saw what New York City is going to turn into. And so if people love Israel, if you support the Jewish people are to start getting focused on what the problem is. And the problem is London is coming to New York City. And after November 4th, when Zohran wins, we're going to have hell to pay. It's going to be an inflection point in American history.
We have much more to talk about. We have to take a short break, but we will be right back after this. Welcome back to the show. Back with us is Steve Bannon, former White House chief strategist and host of War Room. Steve, you more than anybody expanded the definition of what it means to be a Republican, who could belong to the MAGA movement. I myself, of course, was very much the beneficiary of that. You made it clear that this could be a home for Black Americans, Hispanic Americans, Jewish Americans, Democrats, gay Americans, pro-choice people. I guess my question to you is, are there limits? Are there people who you would say, you are not part of this movement, you are not welcome here?
Well, I think, and you know, it's kind of, I don't determine that, but I think it's this whole movement's kind of self-organizing. I think that people are attracted to it, see certain common values. As you know, Batya, we have a lot of Democrats, particularly younger Democrats, I think are looking for a home. I think particularly as the Democratic Party escalates into, goes up the escalatory ladder in violence, I think we're even going to get more people. I think from the last election, you saw working class African Americans and Hispanics, and particularly a lot of men, because of the anti-male agenda or the toxic masculinity as purported by the Democratic Party. It's kind of self-organizing. I think, listen, so far, I think we've done great. I think the President Trump movement. Now, I would say my only difference in what you just said, I'm not so sure they're in the Republican Party. I think they vote for President Trump. They're MAGA, and they identify MAGA as President Trump. And this is why I am adamant in working on Trump 28. Someone like President Trump comes along, you know, once every 100 years. We've had General Washington, we've had at the birth of the nation, we've had President Lincoln at the rebirth of the nation, and we've had President Trump at the rejuvenation and reclaiming the nation. And so I think we have not solved, we're still the low propensity voter party. When we win, we turn out low propensity voters, and particularly people who are what I call low information voters. Not that they're not smart, they're just not that engaged in politics, right? But they see in a message of MAGA and they see in a message of President Trump something that will get them to the polls. And so I would say we're open to all as people come in, and you know, I don't determine this. Even President Trump doesn't determine it. So but we'll have to see. And there's always going to be skirmishes between people, you know, what I call inter-squad scrimmages all the time. And that's what political parties are made of. But I think as an organic whole, we happen to be growing. And I think in the Democratic Party, particularly as the Democratic Party becomes more violent and more kind of almost obscure in what they're fighting for. I shouldn't say obscure, it's the wrong word. They become kind of weirder policies, but more intense policies that are clearly anti-American. And you see, more things you see like what happened in New York City on October 7th and who they're holding up, the Luigi Mangionis, you know, the Zohrans. I think the more you see of this, the fight to remove illegal alien invaders from the country in Chicago and Portland and others, the more embracing of Antifa, I think we'll get more working class people to our side that are looking for the economic benefits of the American economy.
So let me ask you about Trump 2028. We have a 22nd Amendment, which bars anybody from running for a third term. Do you think that that's not a barrier for him, or how do you see that?
I think that there are many different alternatives that at the appropriate time after the midterms in 26, we will roll out. But I think there are many different alternatives to make sure that President Trump is on the ballot. And if he's on the ballot, he'll win. So I think there's many different alternatives. Remember, people said back in the interregnum that President Trump, what was it, the immunity situation, trying to kick him off the ballot in Colorado, other things about presidential immunity, what he had done, and some of the acts. People said we were going to lose at the Supreme Court. I think both of those we won 9-0. I think the Supreme Court has Roberts Court in looking at President Trump's, I think his interpretation of the real powers, or I call the expanded powers of the chief executive, both, you know, the office of the president, chief executive, commander-in-chief, and also the chief magistrate and chief law enforcement officer. I believe that the Supreme Court's sending a very strong signal that it's reversing what the Warren Court tried to do in staying out of what they call political issues. I believe this will be deemed to be a political issue and worked out accordingly. But I fully intend to see President Trump on the ballot in 2028 and to return to office as to continue the great run he's had as 47th president of the United States. Like I said, you know this better than anybody. If you've seen the Herculean task that he has done in the Middle East and particularly in Gaza and Israel that seemed like it was intractable to really solve what's 50, 60, 70, 80 years of hostility to get people to work together, that only comes along once every couple of hundred years. And it's very important, I think, for us as a nation to keep President Trump as the chief executive officer and the commander-in-chief.
But you would support that in the context of legal means, correct?
Well, yeah. I mean, you have to. It's going to have to be legal, right? It's going to have to be legal. I don't know of any illegal means. I don't think there's any illegal means that you could actually do that the American people support. And this has to be supported by a broad spectrum of the American people. Remember, President Trump won the popular vote. I actually think when you look at the real numbers and take away some of the noise, I think he's more popular than ever. And look, you just saw, I mean, it's kind of a joke on the Nobel Prize. Of course, the progressives are never going to give Trump the Nobel Prize. Well, but here's the reason is that the situation in Venezuela, the woman who's actually I'm a huge supporter. She's very brave, standing up to Maduro and these guys. And I'm not for a military interdiction into Venezuela at all, but she doesn't exist as an entity unless you really have President Trump and the umbrella that President Trump, the space that President Trump is giving her to actually be the next potential leader in Venezuela. So, I mean, the whole Nobel Prize thing's a joke. Most people understand that. Look, just look. You know the situation better than anybody. Look at the joy that is in Gaza and in Israel today. Look at that. That is nobody in my generation or whatever has ever seen anything. The outpouring of tears, of hugs, of people saying we could go forward. And like I said, when you see the IDF, who are tough as boot leather, when you see a spokesman come up and really have tears in their eyes because the war is finally over, right? That shows you that a figure like Donald Trump, he's a world historical figure.
I could not
this
agree
is the
with
age
you
of
more
Trump,
about
and
that.
I just think we have to play. I think we have to play it out.
Last question: if the legal avenue towards repealing the 22nd or getting him on the ballot fails,
I never said repeal the 22nd Amendment. I said I think there are many alternatives. Many alternatives.
If those alternatives,
I don't think the American people would ever support someone that they didn't think it was in the customs and tradition and/or legal. If you're definite, what your definition of legal is. But like I said, if you watch MSNBC, you watch CNN, their interpretation of how the highest court's going to interpret the Constitution is not just wrong, it's dead wrong. If you look at President Trump and what he has done in the Article 2 powers of being the chief executive, of being the commander in chief, and repelling the invasion, and particularly being the chief magistrate and chief law enforcement officer. I mean, Russ Vought announced today by Twitter he's beginning the rifts on the administrative state. Okay. That is not all these people that said what was legal and everything like that. So I think that the definition.
If this effort fails, will you consider running for president in 2028?
No, I'm not. As you know, I'm not a politician. No, I am fully 100%. I'm a Trump guy here, and we're going to pull it off. The nation needs President Trump. The world needs President Trump. In the streets of Gaza, what has been a horrific 2-year, from the worst slaughter against the Jews since the Holocaust to the bloodshed that's taken place, the loss of life of the IDF and the Palestinians, it's been a horror show. And President Trump has brought joy to the streets on a hard-headed, tough business deal. And so the world needs this guy more than ever, and the country needs this guy more than ever. So I am spending every waking moment to make sure we got him.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bannon. God bless you and protect you.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.